Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast where we explore bold ideas and shape the future of medical affairs. Today, we're joined by Sabrina Guigan. She's a thought leader in medical communications with extensive experience in omnichannel strategy and innovative communications. So Sabrina is currently leading the global medical communications for Rare GI at Takeda, and she is really redefining how medical information is shared with HCPs through cutting-edge multisensory experiences. So in this episode, we're going to dive into Sabrina's innovative approach to medical communications and talk more about how she created a really cool, immersive tactile experience at a medical conference. She also navigated the compliance hurdles that come with that and fostered the internal collaboration that leads to creative and impactful patient-centered messaging. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Wesley. It's so nice to be here with you today.
So Sabrina, to kick things off, could you share with me what really defined your approach to medical communications? I know you have a pretty diverse and well-rounded background, so I was really wondering how you apply that into your day-to-day medical communication strategy.
Sure. So, when we initially spoke, I think I shared that my background prior to getting into pharma, I was a designer for the theater. And I think that you bring your past with you and you apply it how it's applicable. So, it's all about creating an experience for the stakeholder and being inclusive in that experience so that it looks like a well-oiled machine. And also having served as a volunteer EMT for over 20 years, I sometimes look at it from that lens as well as someone who's given patient care. How can we ensure that we're educating clearly, that we are always looking at how can we improve outcomes for patients, and that we can address the principles of adult learning in making an experience for them.
That's amazing. And I think that clarifies a lot about this really cool approach we're going to talk more about in this episode, which has a lot to do with multisensory engagement, right? And so how do you feel that multisensory engagement plays a role in delivering impactful medical communications? I know you said something around learning and memory retention as well compared with traditional methods. So really wondering to hear more about that.
Sure. And, I think that previously a lot of our learning was very didactic, right? Very much like I'm going to present to you, you're going to absorb it, and then hopefully you can spew it back to me. And, we've learned that people learn different ways. Just like when we were kids, some people learn more when they hear something, some people learn more when they see something, and some people like myself are tactile learners. So they actually have to execute some sort of action in order for something to stick. So if we think about the fact that we have a broad range of learning types, the more that we can activate the senses, we create a memory. We also create an experience. And that just solidifies learning because we're allowing the user to use multiple parts of their brain to engage with an opportunity. And that just, it's sort of like extra studying. But you don't have to do the extra studying. And I know there are some companies that are opening up divisions that are based in sound. And, some people are trying to figure out other ways that you can add tactile type of opportunities in. That's why, AR and XR are so important to the learning opportunity of immersing someone in the experience. Because it also, if we think about it, it's not just about learning, how the disease progresses or the clinical data up behind an asset. It's also learning about the fact that how does a patient feel? Because patient care is centered around that patient experience and how can we improve patient outcomes holistically, which includes, how does the patient feel walking into the appointment? How do they feel receiving the news about what's going on with them? And how are they doing with their treatment? And when you can engage a patient, the likelihood of them having greater success goes up. So if we can, kind of immerse storytelling, and immersion together, we center on empathy. And that is what kind of rings through in terms of, true educational experience.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I think like, I think what I'm hearing you say is like, we need to educate the brain, but also the heart, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
people tend to remember, an emotional experience better than just dry data. And, like in all honesty, in our industry, a lot of it is about the dry data, and the dry data is very important. But if we can, I think what you're saying is that, and we can add a layer to it that also hits like the more emotive components and connects this in the brain with the more emotive parts, then they will remember it better. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. We're not just, teaching data and teaching the patient journey. We're also teaching the experience. So we're, like you said, we're connecting the heart to the numbers.
Yeah, that is beautiful. So how did you go about that? Tell us more.
Well, I will say that, I think this is applicable regardless of the therapeutic area. I have a special passion for rare, and I think the rare community is so unique in terms of all the stakeholders are very engaged, very focused in on, a common cause, which is, improving diagnosis and then eventually, working towards therapeutic opportunities. I think it's, and we've spoke about this prior, it's a multi-channel opportunity. So, it's thinking about it from all of the stakeholders internally and externally to paint that picture and create that experience. So, starting with the framework of like, what is the scientific narrative in which we're trying to, put forth and educate around. And then who is the stakeholder, who we delivering this message to, who is involved in that message, always having a patient-centric forward opportunity. And then what's the best way to, where are we delivering this message? And then what's the best way to deliver this message? It's almost like the 5 rules of medication, right? Right patient, right time, right medication, et cetera. It's the same thing with a message, or with an engagement opportunity. It's ensuring that, like at a Congress, there's a lot going on, right? You're going to poster sessions, you're going to symposium, you're watching panel talks, you're going to multiple booths. Like, how can you stand out in a crowded space with an opportunity that both educates and also, creates that memory so that perhaps, we see, with the use of technology in education, we see empathy scores go up, we see message retention go up. We also see the intent to diagnose sooner go up. And that's so important in rare because I think a lot of clinicians feel that they feel kind of handcuffed because they're like, we want to diagnose patients, but we don't have any opportunities to give them. What do we do? But if you talk to the patients will tell you, like, we want to know what's going on with us. So please tell us if something is going on. And there's a lot of times there's opportunities that can be offered to the patient where there might not be treatments, but like lifestyle modifications that help them sort of stay in a land of sumo homeostasis until there is a treatment option. So, I think it's working together to understand the landscape and what's important and then bringing that through into an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I noticed in your response here was you were talking about medical booths. And if anywhere, I kind of feel that there's a lot of opportunity or maybe a lot of need because I think the typical medical booth experience is, on the other side of the spectrum from multisensory. So could you tell us more about, that innovative project that we mentioned earlier?
Sure. So, we were trying to, I work on a condition that's one of the more common rare diseases that are out there, but it presents as other things. So it's a genetic condition, and, it can present in 2 organ systems and often gets misdiagnosed because of that. So we wanted to make sure that there was a true understanding of how this manifests, how it progresses, and, what would be the potential end journey for a patient should no intervention occur. There's all sorts of assets you can do with this, right? You can do MOA videos, you can do MOD videos, you can do, infographics, et cetera. But we wanted to really bring the learner into the experience. So we utilized extended reality, and we created an experience where, you put on the lenses and the clinician walks into the body so they can see the point at which the mutation occurs on the chromosome that drives the misfolding of these proteins. You can see how that aggregates in the liver and eventually causes fibrosis, cirrhosis, and in some cases, hepatocellular carcinoma. So you took the clinician, you put them into the body, and you let them see, right at hand. And one of our VPs of medical, he said he felt like he was back in medical school. And this was better than putting, a sample on a microscope, because he was right in there, and you can, the users had controllers and they could turn the liver around. They could, we had engagements with them to create the mutation, to try to see if they could drag the proteins that were misfolded out of the liver, and to show them how only 10% clear the liver, the rest of them bounce back because they can't pass through the endoplasmic reticulum. So, that in itself, and we had almost 200 users in the booth for the experience, and all of them stayed the full extent of the experience. So that's how you also know that it's successful, because a lot of times you'll have quick hits, or people will get they'll tap out early, they might stay for the first couple of minutes and then they take the headset off and they want to leave. There was a true engagement, and there was questions that came afterwards and dialogue, which was really wonderful, because that's what you're hoping happens, that you hope that it triggers something that makes the learner want more. I want to learn more. I want to know more. And if you do an engaging experience that is successful, you'll have more questions than you will have answers, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a few questions here. One would be, you were talking about extended reality.
Yes.
I think a lot of people have heard about augmented reality, but maybe not about extended reality. So what is extended reality?
Yeah. So, there are multiple types of, realities out there. There's, VR, AR, XR, and it's the different layers that come within it. So virtual reality is very much realistic. It would be if you saw me as a created patient and you came in and you'd have a dialogue and sort of do some sort of treatment assessment. And then as we go on and go to, augmented reality, you maybe see the patient, but you can see inside the patient. And then extended reality is a little bit past that. So, it's still involved a very realistic application, but you're really digging in, you're really kind of putting people at the cellular level, at the very finite level. Now, that's how it works in science. I'm sure in gamification, for other verticals, it might work differently, but it allowed us to really bring the user into the experience and see it at the very granular level, because a lot of times these patients with AATD, on the outside, you can't see anything is wrong with them because everything's happening on the inside. So they might not look sick. Maybe their symptoms are not, as exacerbated, especially in the liver versions of this condition. So you're like, oh, well, they just have elevated liver enzymes. What's the big deal? All the while we don't know that this is happening underneath, the skin. So I think, that extended reality experience and being able to let people sort of play in the body and see how things happen and make them engage with the content is super important. Not just throwing it at them. And, I've seen, AR, XR, and VR experiences done where, they're good. They're very clean. The tactile part is maybe not as tied to the story. And I think that that's important too. And that's why it's really important to, as I mentioned earlier, to use a cross-functional approach, to collaborate. I partnered very closely we have a centers of excellence, and one of them's in digital, and she helped me identify the right partner to build out the AR experience. And then I made sure that I was very close in lockstep with my therapeutic area lead in terms of making sure that the story that we told was very succinct and that the engagements that we selected, would really solidify those key educational points along the way. And then I also involved our, corporate communications and patient partners to ask them, like, what do you think of this story? How do you think about how we're like teeing this up? Is there any suggestions that you would give? And even though we all sit in different functions, I think it's important to have those different lenses so that you have a good engagement. And medical booths don't have to be boring. They don't have to be static. They don't have to be just pictures of your pipeline. You can engage with your users, and of course there's regulatory guidelines, which I know we talked about as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into that. I want to dive into the whole cross-functional collaboration and the compliance aspects of this as well. But before we do so, just want to clarify a little bit more around like the tactical or practical application here. So
Sure.
I should imagine you had, I guess you used some kind of headsets. Was there a particular technology you used? And I would also like to learn, like, maybe help us visualize a little bit how this looked like, right? You walk up to the booth.
Sure. So we decided to, and this is not needed. We did it more from a visual sort of standpoint to help draw people into the experience. But we had an arch that on the inside had LED panels that was playing part of the experience that was inside the headset. So you saw sort of free flowing AATs, kind of on the screen. And then what came with that is, we had the headsets outside. We used the Apple headsets. Now, they're very top of the line. They have the highest level of technology. The only challenge, and it's something that is with the technology that, they are working to fix, is that if you wear glasses, using any sort of headset is a challenge because you have to take the glasses off in order to have a comfortable experience. And, some people can't see very clearly without their glasses. Now, they are apparently making inserts of different like lens powers to sit inside the headset. But the question is do you buy every possible prescription there is? How do you manage with the fact that like you're going to have that? So I find the Apple products tend to be the pictures are the crispest and the clearest, and it's the most seamless experience. But that's just my opinion. It's not an advertisement. But they would come up to the experience. We would put on the headset. We would give them the two triggers, and there was a sticker on the floor that would activate the experience, and then they would go right into the liver. You saw people, like we were able to have two people going at the same time. You would see, people standing there and kind of manipulating the triggers, but nothing on, not on the outside. But it did draw a lot of interest when people saw people with headsets on, wondering like what was going on. And that was part of the draw too, is that, participation often drives in greater participation because people are curious.
Hey, we need your help. The best way to help us grow and reach more medical affairs professionals is to share with your community. If you love our podcast, please hit subscribe, leave us a review, and that way we can keep sharing insights from the best and brightest in the medical communications industry. Let's push our industry forward together.
Yes.
Yeah.
By nature.
That's definitely a good approach, I would say.
Yeah.
It sounds really exciting. Like, indeed, like I think like the typical stereotype medical booth is a poster with a pipeline on it. But now when I'm hearing this, I can already hear other people ask themselves in their mind, like, well, this almost sounds like a commercial booth. So why don't we delve into that?
Which is, I totally appreciate that. And as someone who has worked on the commercial side, I can also, appreciate where that would be the lens. Now, we are in development, so we're not even close to product. So there is nothing to commercialize or, message around. But I think that, what we need to do for ourselves is sort of think about who is the end user. And we know that clinicians are getting younger. They want to be met where they are. We can't, and I think that it's sort of, it doesn't serve a purpose from an educational standpoint if we think we cannot utilize technology to help further the understanding of how a disease, presents itself and progresses. I think there's a lot of opportunity to utilize, the growing technology, and it would be, I think, a disservice of us not to learn it and figure out how to incorporate it. I think, there is sort of some fear around like, what does this mean with all this technology? Does this mean I'll have a job in 5 years? And I think yes, because there's still a very strong human component that is needed to create a story. I think that what I learned from this particular experience, and I had done experiences before, but from this particular experience, is that doctors love learning, but they also like to play. And we gave them an opportunity to learn and play at the same time. We kind of gave that, when you're doing an opportunity, an engagement opportunity like XR, and you're learning something, you kind of relax a little bit. So some of the things that maybe like cement you off from like absorbing, important information are let go, because you're like sort of, you've opened up your experience because, you're like connecting, proteins, you're, trying to cause a mutation, you're seeing how the liver progresses through fibrosis, and you're getting to like activate as well as, absorb. And that push-pull exercise allows, a further deepening of understanding. So I think we need to like kind of let go of, any sort of engagement that is fun is commercial. Any sort of engagement in which you learn is educational, and education lives across the spectrum, regardless of what channel you sit at.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more, but I do know that in the day-to-day reality of medical communications, not everyone thinks that way. So often a lot of like discussion and I guess to an extent, maybe some persuasion is needed to get there with these kind of more innovative approaches. So can you tell us a little bit more how you shepherded this through compliance in a way that, made it all work out in the end?
Sure. I think it's super important, and especially as someone who sits on the medical review team for other channels, so I'm a reviewer and I get my things reviewed. I think it's super important to bring people along with you. I, from very early stages, set up a concept review meeting with my team. I walk them through what we wanted to do. I showed them storyboards of how it would kind of look. We show them samples of how this might be then rendered later. Saying like, this is not it, but like, this is what it might look like. And we took them through the entire experience, from the person putting on the lenses to going into the experience, through the references that show up at the end to show that all the data has been, confirmed. But I think bringing people along with you, now you're still going to have discussions. There's still going to be things that you have to decide, like, what do you want to fight for? And I think one of the things that I was really grateful for was the open dialogue that happened amongst the team. And they were very vocal about anything that they were concerned about. And we were able to make sure that we didn't overpromise in our story, because, especially in what I work in, there's still work being done in understanding the natural progression of the disease. We're working on a natural history study, so we're still trying to even understand the disease ourselves. So I think it's super important to make sure that, as you're writing that narrative, what references are you using, and not to overpromise anything. Even if it's in your benefit at the end of the day, you got to make sure that what you're educating around is something that can be, justified. And I, even like, because we had this conference in a different country, we also had to consult the local authorities and made sure we brought them in early too. And I remember talking to the reviewer, and she told me originally that only she would need to look at stuff, but she's like, would you mind if I brought in my compliance and ethics? And I said, no, bring them to the table. Let's have everybody here from the beginning and get alignment. And I think if you keep bringing people along with you and ensure that people feel comfortable, by being open with the experience and allowing them to ask questions and not, challenging their ability to ask questions, but providing answers and data, that you will get the experience that you're hoping to get. It's okay.
I was wondering, like, you were in a phase where it was, I think, all disease state awareness, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that was the reason why you could follow this more creative approach? Do you think this would have been possible if you were closer to launch or post-launch?
That's a great question. Now, for Amsterdam, where we did this experience, we were allowed to introduce the mechanism of action of the asset, and how it would work with the condition. We did follow the country guidelines of the fact that it had to be following the mechanism of or mode of disease, that the user had to select it. Like, we couldn't just make them watch it. They had to. So that's why, in the journey of our experience, it got to a certain point and you could either select to see how the mechanism of action worked, or you could select to see the disease further progress and how that affected the organ system. Everyone chose the mechanism of action, but they could have chose otherwise. Would that be allowed everywhere? Maybe not. And I think, again, it's all about open dialogue. And I think it's about thinking about, what do you hope to get out of the experience, and being open to the fact that you might have to tweak it a little bit based on where you're at. Some countries have very open guidelines and some have very strict guidelines. And I think it's about not allowing that frustration to take over where creativity lies. Because I think, I always see those as opportunities to like up the ante and figure something out. It's like a cool puzzle to solve, rather than like, oh, I can't do what I wanted to do. You just have to like rethink the approach. But I don't think that there's ever not a solve. I think it's just being sure to be clear about what are you trying to communicate and educate around. And, if you're getting pushback that, oh, this seems too messagey, or, oh, this seems too commercial, ask what about it. Because sometimes it's a single word and you can change a lexicon and have your experience. So just open with the dialogue.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think all too often, because a lot of people kind of anticipate that they're going to get some tough questions and maybe some hurdles or challenges presented by them by compliance, they maybe go into some of these conversations already with a little bit of, how do you say that? Like a mindset where, they're maybe scared that it's going to be a problem,
Yeah.
and as a result, they're going to virtually be on the other side of the table while they should be on the same side of the table, and figure out like, how can we do this, and not like, why could we not do it, right?
Exactly.
And I think that has to do with, how we have been operating for a long time.
Mhm.
And embracing this more cooperative mindset from both sides, I think, is really going to help to drive medical communications and medical affairs further with concepts like these, which, sound really impactful and effective. Which actually made me think about my next question, which is, was there some kind of framework in place to measure the impact of this? And I heard you say in the beginning of our conversation, everyone completed the full experience, or you said like, oh, that would be actually a cool metric. So, but tell me more about like, how did you assess impact here?
Yeah. So, when you're building the experience, it's often important to think about, how do you want to measure its success, as you just pointed out. So we, in the discussion with the team about building it out, it was, how are we going to track, how long people stayed? If they left, where did they leave? How long did they stay in certain sections? Because some of it was timed and some of it was controlled, by the user. So, how long did they stay here? Did they just kind of skip forward as quickly as possible? And those are good opportunities and we had a couple other engagements outside of the XRX experience that were tactile engagements. And we track those as well, because I think it's a good opportunity for you to see where further education is needed. Because if you see someone staying somewhere for a while, it's like, well, is it because they found it really interesting, or because they were had questions around that. And so, you kind of benchmark that around like, well, what kind of questions were we getting, in our interactions person to person in the booth, or, things that we might have seen come through our MRFs, medical, information request forms, in terms of like, what were people asking? And, we collected time, each scene had a benchmark of how much time we expected. We saw how much time people spent. Did they spend the full time? What was nice is it looked like a very even spreading of time. So it meant that people really kind of immersed themselves in the experience and went along with the story and the journey. That there wasn't a point where like maybe they got tripped up or whatever. And the feedback that we got, which was lovely, not only from our internal stakeholders, but the external stakeholders. One of our emerging KOLs, she was so excited about the experience and she felt like it was a great tool. And she's like, I wish I could give this, to my colleagues or my, patients to learn a little bit more about their condition. So it's, once you hear that or see that, then you think like, okay, well, how can we expand this opportunity out so that people can also learn from this type of engagement? And it just also sort of solidifies the fact that style of learning is important. And as we're bringing technology more and more into different parts of medicine, I think we need to embrace that and also continue to do that and figure out stronger ways to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look holistically at the insights and metrics that collected by doing this experience, if you would do it again, what would you do differently?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I would have done differently is maybe a little bit, we had two experiences. So we had the XR experience around the mechanism of disease and the MOA. And then we also had this 3D printed model patient journey experience where you could take the patient, you move them along there was circles on a board, and it would take you through the initial presentation, through the lab work, through the diagnosis. And I thought about it afterwards that, it would have been nice had you started seeing, the outside of the patient and go into the patient, because we kind of just started with the liver. And like, it's so important to like have the patient as part of the experience, that it's like, you never walk up to a free floating liver anywhere. It's inside somebody. So, maybe to kind of like, have somebody, even if they were sitting on a doctor table, and then go inside, to kind of, connect that dot of, yes, while we are looking at how a condition manifests, that is it manifesting inside a human.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Humanizing data is important. And also in the industry, we're not all coming from a place where we were working in clinical practice, right? And I think it's easy to forget that we're actually talking about real people, real humans, that the doctors are working with all day, right? So that's definitely a good concept and good idea. Now, let's say someone is listening here to our podcast, and a big conference is coming up in, 6 months, and it inspires them. So they want to do something more creative. What is kind of the thinking framework you would recommend to them to get there?
So I would say, if it's 6 months out, get moving. Because it does take time to build experiences and take them through and get Congress alignment, et cetera. But I would say, don't be afraid to jump in the water, even if you've never done it before. I think, it's not like we're at the beginning of this technology. This technology is ever evolving. So it's not like there are a lot of partners out there that you can work with. And then even internally, there will be somebody probably that has, touched, an experiential system in some way. I would say kind of work with your core team to storyboard out what you're trying to communicate, and then get on board as soon as possible your review team. Talk to them about what you're looking to do, see if there's any trepidation, and find out what you need to to provide them to alleviate that, concern. And then, just always, make sure that you're thinking about what the end goal is in terms of like every time as you're going through the process, are you tying back to the key objective of why you decided to do this initiative anyway? And is it meeting the mark? And then also be open to the fact that, if it isn't turning out to what you think it should have been or would be, like think about other ways to utilize the content that you've already developed. So like, we were very fortunate. It was a good process, but sometimes I know people start developing these opportunities and maybe it doesn't work out how you think it's going to work out. Don't give up, either, figure out a plan B at this time and maybe reapproach it at another conference. But, technology can be tricky, but it's also a great tool. And, don't be afraid, even if it doesn't work out. I think we learn some of our best lessons from when things don't happen as we planned.
Yeah, that's part of doing things anew, right?
Yeah. And communicate. I'm sure, Wesley, you've seen this. We are in medical communications, and yet sometimes the communication is the thing that is lacking. So communication is key.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that came to my mind while you were explaining this, and by the way, thank you. This is a really useful way of thinking about it. One thing is also, I think, brainstorming before maybe setting your mind to a particular idea. And of course, I'm a little bit biased here. I'm talking from the agency perspective. There's many clients or other people from the industry that approach you as an agency, and they have this kind of already idea like, hey, I want to, let's say I want to create a poster with a pipeline on it, right? What we don't hear that often is like, what I would really like to achieve is ABC. I would like this particular group of audience to walk away from our booth and know more about this particular topic, right? And I think changing a little bit the way how you speak with partners may also give a lot more inspiration. And it is not that, the agencies know it all or, I think it's more about like, you need to leverage the people you have around you to be creative. And in order to be so, you need to kind of start with an open mind and an open concept. And most importantly, put your objective first, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Wesley. As someone that has sat on both sides of the fence, I think one of the things, when I'm on the client side that I've noticed is, you get very focused in on, a certain therapeutic space, a certain, asset. And, when you're on the agency side, you have more access to other things that are going on. And I think it's important, the brainstorming aspect in which you brought up, it's so important. Like, what is the end goal? And is this the best opportunity to get you to the end goal? And I think, partners should be, and I think some of them are, being more open to those discussions about, here's our objective. What are the strategies to get us there? And then what are the tactics that will align up to those strategies? And encouraging that thinking and not being tied to something so specific is, like you mentioned, is so important, because you might be going down the road that maybe isn't the best delivery system for that opportunity, maybe for something else, but, just because you saw it and it's cool doesn't mean it necessarily applies, to that moment or that engagement. But, I think that, we as clients need to really lean into our partners on the agency side and say, like, what are you doing with other people? Or like, what are you seeing at conferences that is cool that, maybe we can utilize here to really kind of develop and expand our storytelling capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think is also with the technology, it can be a bit of a risk, right? Because sometimes we see new cool technology, but I always feel that the hardest part of new technology is understanding how to apply it in a way that makes sense, right? And we've seen the Google glasses and the HoloLens, and we've seen, augmented reality with apps, right? And I remember there's one time where someone showed me this, like, it's like, look what I made. Like, we made this beautiful app, and you can now see a molecule projected on your desk. And it's like, yeah, amazing, but why, what objective is behind this? And it's like, well, we wanted to use this technology. It's like, well, you succeeded at that. But I mean, like, rather that than not innovating at all, right? Like, I think it's good to pilot and attempt different things and experiment. I think generally we need to experiment more in our industry and try things out and kind of see how it goes for us. But yeah, like, I think it's always dangerous to start with the technology and then find a purpose for it. And I think we rather need to start with the objective and find a technology that aligns with it. So I like how you stated that before.
Yeah, no, and I think, and you probably see this a lot too, is there's a lot of education that always needs to happen around the difference between a strategy and a tactic. So this is your overarching objective, and these are the strategies you're going to use to meet that objective. And then the tactics are the things that you do or the technology you use to pull that through. Like, you don't start, sometimes on the pyramid, you start from the bottom up, but here you need to start from the top down.
Yeah. Fully agree. Mm-hmm. Well, Sabrina, thanks so much for sharing all of these insights. This was really amazing. Really nice to bring these examples to everyone in medical affairs and medical communications that is listening. Hopefully it brings some inspiration to our community. And thank you for being here today and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wesley. It's been lovely.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedCom's experts. To find out more about MedCom's experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedCom's experts, thanks for listening.